Edvard and Nina Grieg, as happy and in love as any couple could be, were happily married in the year 1867. Contrary to what the title of this piece may suggest at first glance, Wedding Day at Troldhaugen was not composed at the time of their actual wedding celebration, but instead concerns their wedding anniversary. Grieg wrote this piece in 1896 as a memorial of his 25th wedding anniversary with Nina in 1892. That's a lot of numbers. Bottom line is this. Grieg wrote this piece in 1896 about an event that occurred in 1892 that celebrated the memory of an event in 1867. That's weddingception if I've ever seen it. This anniversary celebration was held at their home in Bergen, Norway, affectionately named by the couple as Troldhaugen, upon the suggestion of Nina. Their land was named by the couple after large trolls, which are known to be popular creatures of Norwegian myth. There is no further explanation for the choice of name, apart from the assumption that Nina had an affinity for trolls. Edvard and Nina lived the greater part of their lives here. Their ashes can be found buried there today. Wedding Day at Troldhaugen is arguably one of Grieg's most well-known and finest keyboard pieces. It is the sixth piece in Book 8 of Grieg's series called Lyric Pieces. This piece bears the opus number 65. This piece remains the most popular of them all, and was very well received by the public at the time of its premiere. Book 8 of this series is a description of the guests' best wishes to the newlyweds during the first half, and the second half of this Book 8 is much more reflective and subdued. At this time in his life, Grieg was full of joy and nostalgia at the recollection of his wedding. This piece is extremely representative of his feelings regarding this moment in time. The piece begins with a bright and cheerful mood, and this mood occurs in the two outer sections of the piece. However, within the central sections, a much more intimate and nostalgic mood is suggested. This sentimental verse carefully plays along the edges of a sadness, which may be interpreted as the composer's longing for the past. This piece is written in a fairly typical ABA form, with subsections occurring in the A section. There is one additional subsection in the second A section, which serves as a nice variant and conclusion to the piece. There are also a number of key changes throughout this piece. These keys include D major, A flat major, G major, and B major. The transitions vary among these four keys. In the first several measures, the theme that consistently reoccurs throughout the piece is introduced. The seemingly simple rhythm of 1, 2 and 3, 4 and is fairly constantly strewn throughout the piece. Although this may seem like an extremely simple gesture, Grieg expertly builds on this in the contrasting hand with exciting syncopated rhythms that vary throughout the section. This repeated theme provides a reliable foundation for the audience while so many other factors are brought in, so as not to leave the audience feeling confused or lost in any way. Another motif, the first of which is introduced at the end of measure 2, continues through the majority of measure 6 in the treble line. This is a melodic motif that is also repeatedly used throughout section A. It is not used with the same exact pitches, but is instead used sequentially with differing pitches. Motos are extremely essential to the entirety of section A. The heavy use of motifs gives the listener a sense of familiarity and foundation throughout the entirety of the piece. However, because of the variety that is placed on top of the familiarity, it holds the listener's interest throughout the piece. In section B, there is another heavily repeated rhythmic motif as well, 1 and, the first of which appears in measure 59 in the treble line. This motif is used in both treble and bass lines throughout section B, most of the time by alternating. The heavy use of dynamics within the melody is what brings the immense simplistic beauty to section B. In addition to being a rhythmic motif, this motif also happens to function simultaneously as a melodic motif. The melodic shape remains constant in a sequence that moves down in stepwise motion until measure 67, where the sequence instead leaps up to create the high point of section B, then continues the same down by step sequence. The echo effect is easy for the listener to follow, and the immense beauty is expressed through dynamics. One part of this piece that is important in reflecting the composer's thoughts is the sudden build-up that begins in measure 31 and continues through measure 48. This sequence progresses through the keys in an upward stepwise motion. To me, this sounds as though the composer is attempting to relay his memory of the sudden building excitement of the moment when a couple proclaims, "I do," and the glorious, overwhelming happiness that an individual may experience in that moment. This assists in building climax A of the piece. Grieg creates a striking musical contrast from the "I do" moment against the entirety of section B, with a musical description of a very different emotion. To the ear, section B sounds as if the composer experiencing a bittersweet nostalgia of his marriage in his youth. To us, this can make logical sense due to the fact that this piece was written closely after the time of his 25th wedding anniversary, when he was recollecting this past event. Overall, there are three main climaxes throughout the piece. Measures 48 and 154, arguably continuing through measure 163, are both the same climax of the A sections, and measure 67 is the climax of the B section. These climaxes are extremely contrasting, much like the A and B sections themselves. Climax A seems to suggest the glorious happiness that accompanies the climax of a wedding, the moment of the vows. Climax B represents a deep, wistful longing for the simplicity and excitement of the past. However, the last climax we hear repeated a second time is again that of Climax A. Because of this, we can assume that Grieg wishes to relay that marriage, although it may be more exciting or alluring in youth at first glance, continues to be just as exciting and wonderful in the future years. Grieg wishes to leave his audience with a happy and positive attitude toward marriage. At the very end of the piece, there's an extreme dynamic contrast provided that is worth recognizing, the dynamic surprise. The composer brings the dynamic level all the way down to pianissimo, and the very last chord is fortissimo. This is very exciting to a listening audience due to the extreme dynamic contrast. The listener is expecting a very soft and gentle ending, but Grieg craftily uses the element of surprise, keeping the listener on their toes. This sudden ending may represent the way Grieg feels about the ending of married life, providing a look into his opinion of the future. The ending appears to dreamily drift away, as a couple may grow old together, but at the end of life, although it may come suddenly and shockingly, comes also with immense happiness at recognizing a long-lived, fulfilling life with a true love. It can also be noted that the use of fifth intervals hints at the sound of wedding bells. The constant play between the dynamic markings of staccato and pedaling provide yet another stark musical contrast. Emotionally, this may represent all of the swirling emotions, mixing excitement and apprehension with love and assurity. This contrast is also likely provided in order to keep things interesting to listen to. Overall, Wedding Day at Troldhaugen is an audible representation of a beautiful and joyous memory of Edvard Grieg's past, captured within notes on a staff and brilliantly articulated through melodic and rhythmic motifs, as well as dynamic contrast.